metrics have this way of taking your eyes and zooming them into the near-term things. You start looking around at the boat, the things that are exactly around your feet, and it can be nauseating as a leader. So you have to constantly pick your eyes up and out, put them out long on the horizon to a fixed point, and really decide, are we charting a course towards the intended destination?
Welcome to the CEOpeek show, where we uncover the essence of extraordinary leadership by interviewing CEOs with over 90% approval ratings on Glassdoor. Hello, Jay. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well, Dave.
Yeah, welcome to the show. Lovely to have you here today.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, we're inviting CEOs with a high approval rate, and you have like 98, which is like breaking all records. It's very difficult to get it on Glassdoor, and really appreciate that you took the time to share with us your wisdom and your experience. And we meet for the first time, so we had just like 5 minutes and I felt really connected with you already.
I look forward to the conversation. I get the privilege of leading really an incredible organization that has a tremendous culture that preceded me. And it's really a privilege to lead great people. So look forward to talking about some of their story and leadership with you.
Yeah. One of the things I mentioned earlier, I coach a lot of CFOs, people that come from finance. My career started in finance too. And I know that there's a lot have this perception of this ceiling or inability to cross from the finance position all the way to a CEO. And I'd love to hear from you. What do you think? What the moves that you made, and what was your journey actually going through? I saw that you were as a treasurer, CFO, all the way to the CEO, and now it's the second position as a CEO at David Weekley Homes. So I'd love to hear, what is that for you?
Sure. I spent the early part of my career growing up, as you mentioned, on the finance and accounting side of the house. I was actually an accounting major in school. I worked for a public accounting firm for a few years out of school, and then did largely corporate development, finance side of the house jobs at Crown Castle, where I was for 25 years, including spending 8 years as CFO before being CEO for 8 years at the end of my 25 years there. So I did grow up on the finance side of the house, and there's probably a lot of lessons I learned out of that helped transition to the CEO role. One of those, though, really early on, that I had the benefit of having a number of people in my life kind of point this out, and I saw it really in a pronounced way when I became CEO, is I think I had a really distorted view that really the smartest people in business were on the finance side of the house, and they really understood the language of business. And there was certainly probably some arrogance in that, but there was also a way of training that had occurred in some of the places that I had been. And I was thankful to have some salespeople that I interacted with, some sales groups that I interacted with, some sales leaders, some operational leaders who really pushed me on that. Seeing the world through the lens of that financial side of the house is helpful, but it's not the only view. That the view of business is much more nuanced than that. And that there's an EQ part of business that's every bit as important as the financial statements and the metrics part of the business. And so I would say one of the things that it enabled me the most to make that transition from a more traditional finance role was really an appreciation and an understanding of other elements of the business and how different perspectives can ultimately drive great business outcomes. And that really helped me in my career development. And certainly I saw that in unique ways once I transitioned from CFO to CEO.
Yeah. So it seems like it's appreciation, but also curiosity by the other side. So the kind of expansiveness beyond just the finance, as you call it, the part of the house of the organization. How did you started to evolve your worldview? Actually, were you still in finance? How do you started to expand it? I'm sure that you will not move up without actually having that business view. What did you do to help you to absorb that, embed it into your work?
Yeah, it was about maybe 5 or 6 years into my career. And the CEO, I was in a finance role at the time, and the CEO asked me to take a look at a particular part. We were coming up on an operating budget. And there was a portion of our business that had some metrics and some characteristics that were very different than the rest of the parts of our businesses. But the profitability at the bottom line was really good. And so the CEO said to me, "Hey, I want you to go look at this. This doesn't look right. I would like this business unit, this particular business unit, to look more similar to the rest of our business units. So please go talk to the leader." So I called the leader. I'll never forget. I called the leader and I had kind of my list of questions, the metrics that weren't lining up with the rest of the business. So I called him. He was a very experienced operator, had been in a role similar to he was leading a region of the company. He had been in role and had been in similar roles for 20, 25 years. So he had a lot more experience than me. So I got on the phone. I told him why I was calling. And he said, "I'm a little surprised you'd call. I'm sure you saw kind of our profitability numbers, our margins are really high for the upcoming year." And I said, "Yes, they are." And he said, "You sound like you're calling with concerns. It seems like you should be calling to figure out why my margins are so high." And what proceeded over the next hour was he taught me some about his region, about his business. And he talked about customer characteristics and regional characteristics that were driving his decision making, that he should have the flexibility to do things differently because the market demanded it. And he was very gracious to me in that conversation. And it was a pivotal moment for me to look at a business and see a really thoughtful, smart leader managing a business and not managing metrics. I remember as I was hanging up from him, I thought, I don't ever want to be a guy who drives metrics. I want to be a guy who drives an organization around its mission and its purpose. And that I don't want to become a leader who just tries to drive towards metrics. And I went back to the CEO and I just said, actually, this leader is doing a phenomenal job. He understands his business. I think he's making really good business decisions. And I wonder why we're using these metrics to judge our business, because when I pull the covers back and really dig into this, the metrics are telling a story that's very different than what is actually true about the business. And maybe it's the metrics that are wrong rather than this operator. I remember that often, though, when I'm looking and studying our business and thinking about performance of, are we really operating and running the business? Are we driving towards its mission and its purpose? Or have we become too consumed with its metrics and its measures? And they can be helpful indicators. Certainly you want to have a dashboard and pay attention to it, but I don't ever want to be a leader of metrics and measures. I want to be a leader of people who are working on really meaningful and purposeful work. And if you do that and you do it well, I think over time, the measures and the metrics they'll reflect that if you're using the right ones.
Wow. That was such a profound story. I mean, I'll say we, because I started my career as a CPA too, and I went my career through accounting, right? And all our education is all about the metrics and how to measure the metrics, how to create the metrics, right? And that's a pivotal moment where you just went outside of the metrics and see what is beyond that and change your life, actually, pretty much, right?
Certainly had a big impact on the trajectory of my career. And I still see that. I have to remind myself, even as you go through the end of a quarter, end of a month, and look at the metrics and look at the dashboards, no single metric tells the whole story. And it's oftentimes true. You can think of reasons for metrics in your business. You can get to a metric that's really good. That's a really helpful metric. And you can think of reasons why maybe in a particular example or an anecdote that actually doing something that would hurt the metric would actually be the right business decision. And so as I think about leading people, and I think this is kind of where your question was going, I want our leaders to always think about what is our mission and our purpose. Like we talk about at David Weekley Homes, that we're building dreams and enhancing lives. And we have a lot of metrics. We track a lot of things. We think those metrics help us run the business better. But it's important that our leaders understand and our team understands every day that we wake up and what we're really about is building dreams and enhancing lives. And if we do that well, there'll be a number of metrics that sort of show, hey, those are green and we're trending in the right direction. But that can be hard for leaders, especially young leaders who will think that the key to success is in demonstrating that they can outperform on metrics. Particularly with young leaders, like one of the things that I watch is how do they talk about their metrics? Do they talk about their metrics as though the metric was the goal? Or do they talk about the metrics as a way of supporting their accomplishment of kind of mission and purpose?
Yeah, beautiful. It's both and not either or. You still need the metrics to run a business, but you don't count it alone. You just bring that mission and purpose and the business says, and sometimes intuition also to see what actually the business needs that maybe is outside of the metrics. So we haven't created metrics yet. So maybe the metrics will emerge from what happens in the business and not the other way around, that we want the metrics to show up in the business. And if it isn't, we try to change the business for the metrics, which is what your former CEO asked you to do.
Yes. And you have to be careful that you don't trade a long-term positive outcome, long-term, whether it's growth, foundation for future growth, protection, risk avoidance. You have to be careful because sometimes those metrics, but they're not helpful if the metric becomes so long-term that you measure it, that the interim measures, whether it's at a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis, they have to, by definition, be short enough term that you feel like you can go and change them. And therein lies some risk that you've picked metrics that in the short term may demonstrate an answer that's favorable to the entity, but long term, that favorability may come back and negatively impact you. I was talking to our team recently, and one of the things that we do is we have production schedules. So we measure how our team is doing against production schedules. And we're always wanting to improve. We're forever improving kind of the business. And so we tighten those production schedules. Well, we measure them as a percentage of completion. So if we complete them a day early, that's like completing the production schedule like at 101%. I'll make a simple example. If you're a day late, maybe it's 99% completion percentage. So as you tighten production schedules, you're tightening the target. And that's a good thing because you're making the bar higher. And then the team responds and figures out ways to do it faster. The challenge is that when you step back from it as a team, we've dramatically improved our speed, but we're still aiming for 100%. And so how do you help the team feel a real sense of accomplishment in the metric? And the simplicity of kind of 100% is great in some settings, but it can get lost over time where you show the team, well, 5 years ago, we used to be here, and today we're here. You've made tremendous progress, and we're going to continue to raise the bar. And so no single metric is kind of perfect at that. And it kind of goes back to my point about thinking about the mission and purpose of the organization, but it also relates to, are you doing the right things in the short term that'll drive long-term outcomes? And at times, life is full of trade-offs. And particularly in leadership, leadership is all about trade-offs. And oftentimes, in order to get to what you want, you have to let go of what you have. And metrics, sometimes when you let go of what you have in order to get to something better, sometimes those metrics can go the wrong way in the short term, but they very well may be exactly what is necessary in order to accomplish a long-term good outcome. So metrics are both very helpful and very dangerous at the same time.
Yeah. It's very interesting that sometimes you move your eyes away from the metrics and suddenly you perform better on the metrics. I noticed that is like outcome and process. Sometimes when I'm so outcome driven and I don't look at the process, so I just drive everything by the outcome, which has a matrix, I'm performing less than I will perform, or the organization will perform less than actually just have the outcome, but don't have your 100% attention on it. Like when you have 100% attention on the trees, when you're skiing, eventually you hit the tree.
That's exactly right. And that can happen to leaders. You can run into a lot of trees when you're zeroed in on the metrics instead of having your eyes up and out. One of the analogies I use with our leaders often is I think about being in a boat. And in a boat, if you start to get seasick, the first thing the captain tells you to do is get your eyes up and out of the boat onto the horizon, particularly if you could find a fixed point, something that you can look at and keep your eyes focused on that. That will oftentimes take away a lot of that seasickness. And if you get your eyes down in the boat, all the stuff that's moving around, bouncing around, you feel it in a different way and it can make you nauseous. The same thing is true for leaders. Metrics have this way of taking your eyes and zooming them into the near-term things. You start looking around at the boat, the things that are exactly around your feet, you're really close to you in proximity, and it can be nauseating as a leader. And so you have to constantly pick your eyes up and out, put them out long on the horizon to a fixed point, and really decide, are we charting a course towards the intended destination? And this noise that's happening inside of the boat, it does require attention. But at the CEO level, oftentimes, the steadiness of putting your eyes out onto the horizon talking about what those fixed points are, what our direction is, who we are, what our culture is, being clear about our mission gives an opportunity for people to not be so seasick in the boat as you're bouncing around looking at metrics, and then enables them in an environment that is steady, clear-eyed, sober-minded as a leader, clear about what the direction is. It allows people, I think, to do their best work, and then teams can go away and, if a metric is bad, they can go away and look at it, evaluate it, decide what operational changes need to be made, or if maybe the metric needs to change and we need to be focused on a different metric. I think that's a much better environment as a CEO to create of a steady, clear-eyed, clear path. This is where we're headed, rather than eyes down inside the boat, making everyone nauseous.
Yeah. It reminds me, prior to my career, in corporate career, I was a fighter pilot. And I flew jets, and I was one of the few in the flight academy that vomited a lot. And my instructor always told me, don't look inside. He thought that I'm looking too much on the instruments and I'm not feel. And he said exactly the same as what you mentioned. Look at the horizon. You stop vomit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Leave the metrics aside. Forget about the speed. Feel that. Don't look at the other metrics of flight and just be outside. So
I think there's probably a lot of parallels there. And it's not as though you certainly need to bring your eyes in and look at the metrics from time to time. There are times you better know where the fuel gauge is. You better know where bingo fuel is, right? And you need to know altitude. And there are some things that are really, really important to know. And you should look at those things. But there are a lot of people in an organization who are focused on things, those near-term measurements, those near-term objectives. And it seems to me as CEO that one of the things that should be true about us is that we should be long-term thinkers. We should have our eyes way out on the horizon, because there aren't very many people in the organization that are doing that job. I'm certain of that. Most people do not show up at the office and start thinking about what's going to matter in 10 years. Most people walk into a job and they start thinking about what's going to happen in 10 minutes. And so I certainly try to challenge myself to say, okay, there's a really important task of being a long-term thinker and focused on the horizon that I think the CEO is uniquely positioned to be able to do that because of the amount of inputs, experiences, network that you get in the role. That's a really important part of the role and the job to fill.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to circle back to, by the way, how do you know what bingo is?
It's a great. I'm not a pilot. I was never a pilot. I've just heard them talk about, particularly aircraft situations where pilots would say, like, you don't ever pass bingo fuel, which is the point at which, and you could probably explain it better than me, but bingo fuel, I think, if I understand it correctly, is the point at which no matter what you're doing, you turn around and you go back and land because you're going to run out of fuel.
Yeah. Point of no return, bingo, whatever. Yeah. Cool. You said something earlier. I want to circle back that I really triggered my curiosity. You mentioned EQ, but in the context of the organization. And I just kind of like it registered in my mind. Well, what did you mean? You mentioned that not EQ of individual or a person, but the EQ of the business. Do you remember that? What did you mean by that?
I think that if you create the right culture in an organization, one that values people, and you look for people who share that trait, there will be a natural EQ that is created in a business that values people. And if you create systems inside of decision-making systems inside of the organization that values people in our organization, values people, you will naturally raise the EQ of others. So some will have a naturally high EQ. Others will rise to the occasion as they're surrounded by people who have high EQ. And organizationally, I think you can raise the overall EQ of the organization. So that's what I mean by that. I think good culture creates high EQ in an organization. It almost by necessity has to. So as much as I want leaders to have EQ, I think the EQ of the organization is incredibly important.
Absolutely. It really resonates with me. It's just funny. I just finished a coaching session with the CEO of an airport. And we talk about very similar, but what is a collective? Like, because many people see individuals, but they don't see the collective and feel attuned to the collective. because the collective is like an organism that has EQ. And that can be a team and the whole organization, which for me, an organization is a team of teams. So it's a wider team. And so the fact that you really attune to that EQ of a team and organization, it's a superpower, because I speak with a lot of CEOs that see individuals and they don't have a sense of the collective. So it was quite profound what you mentioned about that EQ of the collective, organization or team. How does it land? Do you see that collective? Is this what you meant?
Is exactly what I meant. And I think as a leader, you have to be thinking about that. There's probably no greater risk. You can, as a leader, then to step into a situation, it could be a crisis, it could be an opportunity. And if the EQ of the organization or the team is not ready for that, it can be devastating. I gave the example earlier of the benefit of putting your eyes on the horizon. The trust element of a team, when you go through a crisis, is shown almost immediately by how quickly can they move their eyes from the worry of what could happen to action. And my experience has been the higher the EQ of the team, the more quickly that people can settle and start to become action-oriented, plan, then take action. And the same thing is true in opportunity. I mentioned earlier about the trade-offs aspect of a team, being willing to let go of what you have. You have to have a pretty high EQ to be able to say, what we have, which has been good, maybe even great, I'm willing to trade that in order to pursue something that I view as of even higher value. And the higher the EQ of the team, it just becomes absolutely critical to its ability to solve it. I've almost never seen IQ be the issue. Oftentimes in the pursuit of growth or in the response of a really difficult challenge, most of the time, really close to the facts or what people think, a lot of times there's gelling around that. Yes, there have been a few occasions in the past where my team has been at completely opposite ends of like, what should we do about something? But that's rare. Most of the time, people are generally in the same zip code of how big an opportunity could be or how good it could be or how difficult a circumstance is. The IQ component is generally pretty close. So what separates is what's the EQ? That's your ability to actually use your decision-making systems to make decisions in the organization, to make changes, to pursue the right things, to avoid the wrong things. And the higher the EQ, the less selfish people become in those settings and the more team and enterprise oriented they become. And that just gets us to a better outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes so much sense, and those that are not familiar with what is EQ, it's emotional intelligence. And I believe that the whole story of leadership is about EQ, because I agree with you. The IQ it never plays a role, because everybody that comes to that leadership position usually already demonstrated the IQ. But the EQ sometimes doesn't exist. And when you mentioned the shift that needs to happen, especially in tough situation, it means if you don't acknowledge that there's fear, which is an emotion, or anger in the room, then, and in some way embrace that, but be aware of that, you will become subject to that emotion rather than being object, and then it gets in the way. So EQ is so critical. So what are you doing to improve, develop, increase the organizational or team EQ?
Yeah, I think the team aspect of it is the collection. And sometimes I wonder if the EQ of the team isn't judged by the lowest common denominator. So the person in the team that has the lowest EQ, if you're not careful, that the team EQ will actually go to the lowest common denominator. It can kill the virtuous positive uplift of multiple players who have really high EQ. So I would say the first thing I would look at on a team is if you have folks who have weaknesses in their EQ, you have to really work on those. That has to be a top priority as a leader, because team will be very limited by those weaknesses. An example I would give of that is, so I had a leader who in team setting would be overly negative. So one of the suggestions that I made to them was I would ask them, how do you believe your team is perceiving you when you talk? On a scale of 1 to 10, rank 10 being they're completely bought into what I'm saying. 1, they completely disagree with what I'm saying. Rank that on a scale of 1 to 10. And then rank connectedness. So are they listening to you in a way where they feel like they're connected with you? Rank that on a scale of 1 to 10. And then I said, I'll do the same thing while you're talking. I'll do the same 2 rankings. And then we would compare our rankings after meetings. And one of the things that I found very quickly was there was a very large disconnect between the perception of him and his own perception of himself. So that is at least a starting point of how do you start to work on those weaknesses of helping them see in some sort of tangible way a ranking of how that is. And that generally, if it's a good leader, they'll start to ask others, hey, can you kind of rank me on this? And I suggest that as a process to them of like, hey, you should ask the other leaders around the table to do the same thing. And that self-awareness, I think, can start to help a leader work on maybe a particular weakness that they have or a blind spot that they have around that emotional weakness. Second thing I do often is I will talk to the team about areas that they think we're either good or bad, high emotional intelligence or low emotional intelligence. Are there things that trip us up? Maybe we have really good emotional intelligence about 6 different things, but if you bring up this one topic, we sort of crater. And sometimes pulling apart those things that we struggle with, the things that we revert to bad habits or bad patterns, sometimes analyzing those and having a conversation about them can pull out things that, maybe I'm bringing that to the room. Maybe there's something about my leadership style. There's something the way I'm approaching a topic. Maybe they think a topic is off limits. They know it needs to be addressed, and somehow something I've done has made it seem like that's not a topic we're going to talk about. Those things can all crater emotional intelligence around a particular topic. And if you can figure that out as a team and then start to address it and change the way you make decisions, change the way you talk about those topics, create maybe a different environment for that conversation, I think those are at least a couple of ways that I've found are pretty helpful at raising the collective emotional intelligence of the group.
Yeah. So I realized like 2 themes. One is like self-awareness, to be aware of your emotional intelligence and where you are, and sometimes more specific about what triggers you, specific topics, sometimes specific people trigger. And I found that actually the ability to announce that you're triggered to yourself and know that you're triggered is enormous for me in relationship, not just at work. If my wife triggered me and I'm not aware that I'm triggered, my response would be very different than if I'm aware, oh, I'm triggered. I will respond immediately very different from a different level of emotional intelligence, right?
It's interesting you bring that up, Dave. Even as you were saying, I was thinking about my first year as CEO, we were going through a really significant, large change management project. And we were having kind of a readout. A team had gone away. They had done probably 6 or 7 months of work. It was a team of about 8 to 10 people. I mean, like they had taken them out of their existing jobs. They had been working 6 days a week, countless hours, like just extraordinary amount of effort, but far more than normal amount of effort. And so we were meeting to go through this. And I was really excited about it because I'd gotten sort of interim readouts. I knew they were headed in a great direction. And I knew that day, the 8 hours we were going to spend together, that there were going to be a lot of insights. Kind of had some of our best leaders working on it. And I'm a pretty good sleeper. Like I go to sleep, but as soon as my head hits the pillow, I'm asleep. I sleep solid basically until my wake up time. I do that every night and I'm sort of ritualistic about it. This particular night, I could not sleep. By the time I got to the office, I mean, I was whipped. I was so tired because I hadn't slept hardly at all that night. In a moment of vulnerability, I said to the team, I've been looking forward to this for like 6 months. And last night I could not sleep. I'm so tired. I was like, I know some of my physical actions today and even maybe my facial expressions or yawns or whatever are going to make it look like this is not interesting to me. I'm really sorry. I couldn't sleep last night. I'm challenged. So if you feel like I'm fading or whatever, you can call timeout and send us away and we'll go grab a drink or walk around the building or something. There was about a minute of silence after I finished speaking. I don't think anybody knew what to say exactly to that. And then one of our leaders said, hey, thank you for telling us that. And the whole day, it was so freeing because they weren't judging my facial expressions or my body language except through the lens that I had given them. I think it showed me from an authenticity standpoint how powerful that can be of just allowing people to see as a leader that you're a person. You have weaknesses. And sometimes you don't sleep well or some other failure. And when teams see that, I think the facade comes down a little bit. The barrier to communication can come down. And in the midst of that, I think there can be really rich and fulsome discussions that can be really beneficial to teams.
Yeah, that was really touching. I mean, I believe that authenticity equal vulnerability. True authenticity comes from the courage to be vulnerable. Earlier, you mentioned that one person with low EQ will define the collective. I'm not sure of that, but no doubt that the CEO EQ will define he has the biggest impact on the collective EQ of a team and organization, because nobody will help a CEO, usually depends on the trust in the team, to get out of their whatever triggered them. Also, some people that the CEO, if he like you, can be vulnerable and authentic, can help others to bring their vulnerability to the workplace and to the team. And it opens the door to much deeper connection, actually.
Yeah. I think learning to control those emotions, at times the emotion can be really helpful as a leader to steer a direction. I always think, though, I don't want to let the emotion inhibit the learning. And those triggers that you can have as a CEO, whether it's frustration, disappointment, anger, they become a pretty big barrier to learning. Because I've never been in an organization where the frustration of a leader didn't result in people trying to avoid that frustration at all costs. And so ensuring that you're careful about where that, particularly emotions of disappointment, anger, frustration, those just cannot be barriers to learning. They undermine the ability to be successful in the job. You're trying to learn as much as you can and to draw people in as much as you can. You need a really fulsome view of the organization, and you need to hear the things that are hard. It's not what you want to hear maybe, but it's what you need to hear. Particularly those triggering emotions, as you were referring to. Some of those triggering emotions are really damaging to kind of that learning and drawing that out of individuals in the organization.
Yeah. Well, not if you catch them on time, in real time. I know a lot of people that will struggle to control emotion, because what you do when people see control emotions, they suppress their emotions. So, you don't let go, you don't know, you just put them down, and eventually they will bubble up and even explode even stronger later on, or surpass aggressive behaviors. I believe that when we don't suppress the emotion, don't try to control them, actually embrace them, you can notice them, and then we are not subject to them because we bring them in. Oh, like I'm triggered, and I'm asking myself, hey, Dave, what are you feeling? I feel anger. I give an example. My daughter didn't pick up the phone and didn't reply to my text. So I felt anger. Pick up the phone. And then I noticed, and if I responded from that, I won't send a nice text. But then I asked myself, what am I feeling? And I felt, oh, I'm angry. What else, Dave? I feel that I am sad, maybe that she's not picking up the phone, the dad phone. And what else, Dave? What else are you feeling? And I feel like fear that our relationship she's grown up. She leaves, like, our relationship go down. And then I'm out of there because I didn't control my emotions. I just embraced them fully, and the trigger's over. It's just gone. Yeah.
Sometimes that's hard to do in the midst of a very large presentation. So there's a balance of like how introspective can you be and being somewhat careful, particularly around the triggering emotions, I would say, in larger groups. And then the processing, why is that? Why did I feel so triggered so quickly? Why did I tend towards that so quickly? And the processing of what those emotions are and how to best navigate them does become really important. And ensuring you have time as a leader to step away from group meetings. I mean, making sure there's time built into the schedule to think, reflect, to process is both emotionally for your own personal growth, but also the organizational growth is really critical.
Yeah. But it's like a muscle. Don't use it and we lose it. And once we start to be aware, I'll just follow your thread of the awareness and the trigger and be aware that we're triggered. Slowly it become in real time. Today, I feel like I'm pretty much, and many of my clients also share with me, we find ourselves that we see the triggers actually, because the emotions are energy and emotions. It's in their body. And once they have that body awareness, they feel, oh, the emotion is coming even before it fully took over. and they announce to themselves, I'm triggered. What do you feel? That process in the brain takes split seconds. So you can do it in the midst of a presentation to the board when some board member asks you like a crazy question and you get angry. Oh, I'm getting angry, and catch yourself before it's just bubble out.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah. One thing actually I was curious about, I recently had a lot of founders on the podcast, but you transitioned from CFO to CEO, right?
Yes.
And it was in the same company. How was that transition for you? I truly struggled when my peers became my direct reports, especially when two of them competed for the job and one of them didn't get it. And now they report to me. I wonder how was that experience for you, and how did you manage that transition when your peers become your direct report?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you a story about a huge mistake I made. I became CFO in 2008, just a few months before Lehman Brothers failed and the banks started to fall apart. It was both a terrible time and a great time to be a brand new CFO. We had a significant amount of debt that was coming due in a very short period of time. And it appeared as though those capital sources were going to dry up and we were going to be in a very difficult situation. And at the same time, we had an operating investment plan that was underway that I knew as soon as Lehman started to fail in the weeks leading up to that, I knew that we needed to stop investing and we needed to hold cash in order to be able to weather the storm. And I was scared about doing that because I viewed myself as more of a strategist than I did an accountant. And I didn't want my first thing I did as CFO to be pulling back on capital spending. I was like, oh, here's the new guy. Here's the new CFO. Of course, the accountant wants to cut costs. So I didn't. And I wasted some really valuable months of spending that we could have pulled back and made the situation easier for ourselves. Roll the clock forward. Thankfully, we were able to figure out a way through it. Didn't end up having to sell equity, but we were close. And one of the biggest career lessons I've learned from that, which I tell people all the time, is the day that you get the job, you have the job. Regardless of how you got there, who else was considered for the job. You may have been their first pick. You may have been the 10th pick. It's completely irrelevant. Now you have the job and you have to own it that way. So the first day you have the job, there is no ramp up. There is no time to season into the role. You have the responsibility and the role, and you have to think that way. And it becomes even more important at the more senior roles, COO role. And so whenever I'm promoting somebody into an executive role or even a junior role and they're getting a promotion, that's the first thing I tell them is you have the job. So you have full responsibility for the job day one. I think that mindset is critically important. Then I think the second thing I would say is in a situation where you're promoted among your peers is you've got to just have the very direct conversation with them because you're setting a tone for how you're going to lead. They wanted the job. They didn't get the job. So have a real conversation with them of, I know this is disappointing and I know this is something that you had wanted and pursued, and you have a real conversation and you start to unpack with them. What are their career aspirations? What are their goals? It very well may be that you can help them achieve some of those career aspirations and goals in a different way than what they had maybe even hoped. But I would go headlong directly into that conversation and have a very frank and honest conversation at the earliest of days if I was promoted ahead of peers. And I always recommend that to people when they step into those kind of jobs. You have the job day one and then go have that direct conversation. Don't let it linger. Don't let there be any question about it. And it may be, if you know them well and they're a peer and you don't think that they're going to be able to do their role or their job, you don't think they're going to be effective in that, and you want to make a change, it's probably good for you to tell them that and to be direct about it. If you think they're excellent and you want them to stay enrolled, then you should tell them that. You understand their disappointment, but you see that they have a tremendous amount of ability and potential in that role and that they're a critical part of the organization and they're important to you. And you want them to stay in role and you want them to thrive. So I would say you just have that conversation as frankly and as directly as you can, as early as you possibly can.
You were obviously more mature than I at that time. Funny, I was promoted just when the crisis at the end of 2008 to CEO. from COO, and I needed to deal with all the wake of this crisis on the impact on the results. Like before me, everything is great. When I was promoted, everything went downhill. So getting out of that situation was a nerve-breaking, pretty much at the same time that you were promoted to CFO. So
those were interesting days.
yeah.
I used to laugh. People would say, boy, it must be tough to be a young CFO in the midst of this crisis. And I said, well, the last time it was this bad, it's almost 100 years ago. So there's no CFO who's been through this before.
Yeah. Jay, it was such a fascinating conversation. I really enjoy every minute and learn a lot. And yeah, you had a very interesting journey. And I love the way that you actually articulate your worldview. I think that many senior leaders can learn from that.
Thanks for having me on, Dave. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for joining.